Hello, everybody. Myself and hello from Peter and myself at Media Voices, and it's Peter waving. This is the latest in a CONFEX webinar series, and today we're going to be looking at tips for launching a newsletter. So this webinar actually came out of an article we wrote last month about what we'd learned from launching our own daily newsletter. As well as that, we talked to quite a few publishers and editors around the industry generally, and between us we get, I think we tossed it up, it was between 60 and 80 newsletters each between us each week. So we've got a lot of best practice that we want to share, and if you're looking to launch your own newsletter, then we hope by the end of this session that you'll have a bit of confidence to do that. We do really want to encourage questions and interaction, so if you've got questions at any stage, please just use the Q&A box and we'll sort of do our best to weave that in as and where it's appropriate. And also just a final note that this session is going to be focusing on content-driven newsletters and editorial newsletters rather than product and marketing. So I'll just hand over to Peter, who's just going to do a very quick introduction to who we are.
Hi, everyone. Esther and I are 2/3 of the Media Voices podcast. Our other host is Chris Sutcliffe. He's not here today, he's working. Well, we're working, but he's in a real job. We're just having fun with us. We do a weekly podcast, which is all about media news, and also an interview every week with a key player from the industry. That could be anyone from Twitter to actually Duncan Siegel from Mass Media. Generally, we do analysis of what's going on in the industry. We do it for ourselves, but we also do it for other people. And part of the reason why we're here today, I think, is that we went from a weekly to a daily newsletter back in May. We've just reached 150 iterations, if you like, of that daily newsletter. So what we want to try and share is what we've learned from some of that, I think, in today's session.
Just an introduction to us too. This is Media Voices is still not a side hustle, is it? But it's a part-time thing.
Yeah, it's a part-time thing.
So yeah, I'm apart from Media Voices, I'm also a freelance media analyst, podcaster, and designer. I used to work at Dennis Publishing. I was there for a couple of years, and before that, Peter and I were actually at the media briefing with Chris together, which is how all this came about. So yeah, I've done plenty of writing on everything to do with newsletters, media, publishing, and everything in between.
And I've been doing this for a very long time as a B2B editor and a content manager for a bunch of different companies, and now freelance writing for all sorts of people about the media. Really, our focus is what's going on in the media and how can we help people make better bets in the media. And that's the kind of tagline that we use. So without further ado, what we talk about today. So I'm assuming that a lot of the people on this session have actually already got newsletters of one description of another, and what you're actually looking at doing is turning it into something with more value than maybe it is at the moment. A lot of people do straight up marketing newsletters or just broadcast newsletters that just let people what they do as a business, let people know what they do as a business. What we want to try and talk about is this editorial content-led newsletter. And I think there you're really talking about getting your head around the same thing you have to get your head around with any media product. Who's your audience? What makes what you're trying to do different? Now, whether that's an event, a magazine, a website, or in this case, a newsletter, same questions. You got to figure out what your content's going to be, what can actually make sense within your organization. Can you produce it? Can you produce it regularly? And it will be different and good enough for people. And then what you're trying to achieve with it, the newsletter. Are you trying to market a product? Are you trying to just get people signed up for the newsletter and make money directly? Get your head around what that is. And then finally, how are you going to actually know if it worked or not? How are you going to measure your performance? And really the whole thing there, I think, is that's a media matrix. That works for any media product. So look at your newsletter as another part of that portfolio, whether you're in events, whether you're in magazines, whether you're in websites. It's the same idea.
And what we want to do with this is we'll give the kind of generic framework about how to approach this, and then we'll say how our own newsletter shaped up against it. Because, you know, I mean, we were looking at launching a daily newsletter for quite a long time before we actually finally said, right, what do we want to do? How do we want to make it valuable to our audience? So yeah, for each example, we'll try and sort of say, well, this is how we approach this, and yeah, how we ended up at our iteration.
So there's your big question, why you want to launch a newsletter. I think there's all sorts of reasons. I think particularly in the times that we're in at the moment with COVID, working from home, newsletters are actually a really good way to get straight up direct engagement with people. You're landing in their inbox. You don't have to rely on them coming to you. So as long as you can get them signed up and get them engaged, you've got a really decent start for a relationship. And then beyond that, I think people are looking for maybe shorter content formats or jumping off points. And a newsletter, we'll see in a bit, a newsletter can be a great jumping off point where I don't want to read every article in a particular website or whatever, but a newsletter will help me decide what I want to focus on, and we can get more niche on it. We've got a quote here, Nick Newman. And I think this is an interesting, I've seen a couple of articles about this recently, about this golden age of emails. But what Nick Newman is talking about there is this idea of habit and loyalty. And if a newsletter is coming to you every day or every week or even every month, you're actually starting to build that regular relationship with your audience. And that's a big deal. Again, if you look back at events, which maybe only happen once a year, maybe 2 or 3 times a year, then you've actually got this ongoing relationship through a newsletter that you can develop. And I think that's a really big deal. With a magazine, if your magazine's monthly, the newsletters, they're more regular than that. So you're actually being able to move a needle on the frequency in terms of how you're actually interfacing with your audience. I think that's Nick's point in this. Sorry, Esther.
I was going to say, the report that this quote came from, it showed that actually email newsletters are consistently the top driver for things like subscriptions, event sign-ups, you know, magazine subscriptions, and it is still, despite the fact it's one of the oldest technologies on the internet, it is still one of the most valuable ways of building a relationship with your audience.
So our next question, we've actually got a question for you guys. What newsletters do you like and why do you like them? You can put your answers quickly in the chat if you feel so moved to. For us, I'll say a couple and then Esther can jump in with a couple of hers. For me, there's a couple of paid ones that we love. People actually spending money. Hot Pod is a podcast newsletter from a guy from Nick Qua. Stratechery is a technology email which comes out, what, Esther, twice a week paid and once a week not paid? Yeah,
there's quite a few that are following that model now.
And then the information, which is completely paid, which, you know, is slightly different because it's a companion newsletter to a website, but it's pretty powerful. Other ones that are getting a lot of attention is Morning Brew, which has just been bought apparently, and the Industry Dive newsletters, which are very, very niche B2B newsletters. Any from you, Esther?
Actually, I really like Axios, which is another company that's built their entire business around newsletter verticals. But they very much, you know, apart from the fact that for quite a long time it was very difficult to share the stories within them, they just delivered everything you needed to know in one email once a week, certainly for the media one. We've got Suzanne Oliver, who says Mark Manson every Monday is her favourite.
I don't know that one.
No, I've not heard that one either, actually.
Did she say why she likes it?
No.
Tell us why you like it.
On that, Suzanne.
I mean, I think what's interesting about when you start to actually look at newsletters, The Guardian, as an example, has 50 different newsletters. You know, and they get very, very niche. The Telegraph, I think, has even more than that. And you can tell who reads The Guardian and who reads The Telegraph. You know, The Guardian's got a kind of, this week in the patriarchy newsletter, while The Telegraph has a by royal appointment newsletter telling people all about the royals. So people, you know, these publishers are using them to target their audience and to dig down into what the audience actually cares about.
Yeah, and I think that it's a really important starting point when you're looking at doing your own newsletter. What do you like and why do you like it? Like, what is it about a particular newsletter that particularly captures your attention, because if you like it and you've got, that's something you want to build on, it's hopefully you'll then be able to create something that is also valuable to the people you want to reach. And we've got Paul Fenton, who says Visual Capitalist is one of his favourites because it's based on infographics, so it's quite a different approach.
Oh, nice. Yeah. And again, that's finding an angle for people. If you can make your newsletter stand out, go back to Axios. What Axios does really well is this theory that they have, this media theory called smart brevity. And they walk people through stories saying, here's a headline, here's why it matters, here's some more reading if you really want it. I think that's really clever. That's one of the strong points about Axios. I think what Esther just said is, why do you like something? You got to, when you start thinking about your own newsletter, you got to ask those questions for your audience. Go to the next slide, Esther. There you go. Who's your ideal audience as your starting point? If you've got that audience framed in your head, whether you do that through marketing personas, whether you do that through people that subscribe to your products or come to your events, whatever it actually is, figure out who your ideal audience is. And it might just be part of your actual overall audience. It can be segments. One of the things that newsletters do really, really well, because there's not a direct cost involved in them other than the time, is that you can segment it at different parts of your audience. So who is your ideal audience? And then maybe even what segment is that? And then I love this question. What problem are you trying to solve? What are you trying to fix for them? Why are you going to make their life better? I think that's a really, really big deal, because those are the newsletters that you open up every single time they come in, because in the back of your mind, you're always thinking, this might actually solve a problem I've got. I know that one of the ones that I get and I actually pay for is a newsletter. I can't remember the lady's name, but it's called the Professional Freelancer. And I open it every single time because it's got tips on pitching, finding new business, how to basically deal with the business of being a freelancer. And I open that every time it comes in. And I hope, Esther, you can talk to this a little bit. I hope that's what people feel about the Media Voices daily newsletter, that people feel that they're going to figure something out.
Yeah, the problem we identified, because we had a weekly newsletter at first, and the problem we found with that is that by the time the episode had gone out and we sent the weekly email 3 days later, a lot of the content in it was a week out of date. And in media, as I'm sure many of you know, the news moves too quickly to be able to do that. And it would just get to stage that people weren't clicking on any of the news, but they were clicking on our analysis at the bottom. So it was clear that they wanted to hear more from us about evergreen content, but the daily news was irrelevant. So, and there's then a secondary problem that there are so many media newsletters out there. And I mean, Peter, you can back me up on this, like the ones that we get are so long every morning. You spend half an hour scrolling through them sometimes in the morning. And I'll talk a bit more about our tagline later, but we said, well, actually, what would be of value is just in a nutshell, here's the 4 stories you want to know. No more, no less, just this is what you need to know every morning. It will take you 2 minutes to skim, 4 minutes to read. So that for us is the problem we were solving. It's just that there was so much content that we did then do the job of scrolling through, picking things out and presenting that to you in your inbox in the morning.
And I think we address this later, but it's that idea of playing to your strength. We can do that because our job as media journalists, media analysts, is to read all these newsletters. So it wasn't a stretch for us to go through, pick the most important stories, and actually then pass that on to people. So the job that we're doing for people is filtering those stories and making it easier for them to understand what's going on. That's that value point. That's a proper value proposition of what it is that we're doing.
Yeah, and I mean, this question, it's very difficult to think of other examples to generalize in this sense, because for every one of you listening, your ideal audience and the problem you want to solve from them will be different. But there's opportunities with content emails in all sorts of ways. So these are the 3 questions that we think you need to ask before you basically start writing anything.
Yep. none of us do this for fun, I assume, unless you've got some kind of trust fund going on. Why are you doing this? For yourself? What is the point? And I think there's probably 3 areas that we would identify immediately, certainly from our point of view. You're promoting stuff, you're marketing stuff, whether that's the launch. Another thing that we do actually is a podcast awards, publisher podcast awards. And we've used the newsletter, both our Media Voices newsletter and a separate publisher podcast awards newsletter, to let people know when the awards are open, that we're accepting entries, and to promote the actual process. If we do something different, we do sponsored podcasts so we can get them out through the newsletter. We don't particularly have any offers, but we do let people know when we've written a report, and that they can download it, usually for free because they're usually sponsored. So that marketing aspect is really important. I think the one thing I would say is don't overdo it. You know, there's a balancing act that you need to do there. And I don't know what that rule is. What do you reckon, Esther? Four independent stories and 1 promotional?
I've seen rules that are 90-10.
Oof.
Because we only have 4 stories, it's a bit more difficult to get that balance. But yeah, if you're looking at doing a content-driven newsletter, your self-promotion needs to be carefully balanced.
Yeah, don't overdo it. And I think people know that. You know inherently, you know yourself that if you're taking a mickey with something like that. Other objectives for us, particularly with the podcast, is to grow the audience. It's to reach people that we might not be reaching with the podcast. We ask people to share the newsletter. We'll talk about social media in a second. We're just looking to get a bigger audience. You're in media, you know why that matters. It is unfortunately at some level a numbers game. So we're trying to get that growth. But also I think one of the things that we want to get to is loyalty. And Esther maybe talk a little bit more about this in the metrics section, but the idea that you're engaging people on a regular basis, they're coming back to you regularly. And you get that idea of people that are committed to you. It's easier to do other stuff with them, whether that's sell them something or whether that's get them to look at a new product that you've got sponsorship around, or just get them engaged. And that kind of neatly brings us to revenue. People are making direct revenue from newsletters. Esther actually just did a podcast episode talking about exactly this. I'll actually let Esther talk about that.
Okay, I was going to say I was going to bring up the Morning Brew example where they've just been valued at
they've just been bought
$75 million.
Yeah,
just for a newsletter business. I mean the episode I did was very much on individuals launching their own newsletters, but I mean there's again you look at Axios and their entire business model is built around purely newsletters. I think they made, again, it was about 70% of their total turnover for the year just on their newsletter advertising. So there's a lot of opportunity there if you've got a really good newsletter, and the audience doesn't even have to be that big for it. It's just if you've got the right audience, there's a lot of opportunity there.
I think in the past people have thought of they haven't necessarily thought of newsletters. They've thought about email and they've thought about it as disposable. Now I think there's a curation aspect or a publishing aspect coming to newsletters that makes them more part of the publishing portfolio, and that's where you can start either getting subscribers in or selling advertising directly. So I think there's a shift happening there, treating newsletters maybe almost as many magazines in that sense.
Yeah, and again, I think the final point I'd just say, and again, I'm sure most of you will know this, is that with newsletters, people have said, yes, I accept, if I sign up, I'm happy to get something regularly from you. You're not constantly having to chase them around Twitter, chase them for engagement here, chase them there. They don't have to come to you. They're giving you permission to go straight to them, which is really, really valuable.
So this is the elevator pitch. I mean, it says exactly what it does exactly what it says in the tin. It's a daily roundup, 4 stories, industry news, the end. And I think that very, very simple, straightforward message is really important. Again, if you're thinking of a newsletter as a mini magazine, then think of it as a tagline on the magazine. What's your positioning statement? Get people really understanding what it is you're doing. And it's not just about, I don't think that's just about getting registrations. I think it's also good for your own head if you can look back at that, you're remembering why you're doing it, and you can continue to sort of realign your content against that kind of positioning statement. I mean, some of the best ones, Morning Brew, we've talked so much about, but Morning Brew's tagline is "Become smarter in just 5 minutes." You know, that absolutely tells you that this is a intelligent newsletter. It's going to give you a news roundup that lets you talk about other stuff, and you know, you'll be a better person for it. Industry Dive is different. Whatever the subject is, it could be the food industry. It's basically just the latest food industry news in your inbox. That's it, no more. So it's all about keeping that one simple, almost as much for your own mission as for what you're trying to sell.
Yeah, I think actually this is where I see some of the biggest mistakes being made. Is people say, "Oh, we've got a new newsletter," and you ask them what it's about, and 5 minutes later they're still explaining it to you. It's like, you need to be able to say in a sentence what it's about, and let that focus you, and let that guide you, and let that guide your strategy as well.
Yep. This is Esther's slide, so I'm going to let Esther talk about this one.
Yeah, I think we were talking a little bit earlier about where newsletters fit, and I just wanted to share this example from us, because again, we sat there and we said, right, what value is a newsletter to us? Where would it fit in our ecosystem? So for us, there are these three kind of groups of people. I mean, there's a fourth. There's people who don't know about us, but we'll work on them. And for those that are aware of Media Voices, we possibly wouldn't expect them to commit to a newsletter from us just yet. But the next two, we can funnel people down, people that follow us and people that then listen to us or engage with us regularly. The newsletter is quite a good starting point for that. So I think, again, if you're looking at doing a content-led newsletter, do something a bit like this, where you're saying, where will this newsletter audience fit in? How will it help people go through your own ecosystem? And if that's, if events are at the end are in your little circle there, how can a content-led newsletter help you drive people to those events? And so, map out your own little one of this.
I think that idea of the funnel is really important. It's like, once you've got people in there, you've got to give them some value. And the newsletter is a great way, a quick way of delivering some value that hopefully will then move on to them getting engaged with the other stuff that Esther's talking about there. Okay. There's many different kinds of newsletters. As Esther said, there's the ones that are really, really long, and then there's the ones that are really short. There's ones that are original content and ones that are not. I think we've tried to sum this up in these four areas. And I think this is when you're thinking of doing your newsletter, you can decide which of these works for you. If you've got someone in your organisation that is seen as a subject matter expert, then the thought leadership aspect of this is a good one, because it's a great vehicle for putting your organisation's ideas out there. Now, whether that's because you are leading the industry in a particular direction, or because you've got editors that are leading the industry or have opinions, whatever it is, it's just a way of getting those thoughts out there really regularly and quickly. And also, some of the platforms are very good at letting people give feedback, and not in a Twitter comments dumpster fire kind of way, actually manageable comments that you can deal with, and you know who they've come with and get back to them. My example of a good thought leadership newsletter is Scott Galloway's No Mercy, No Malice, which I think is weekly. And it's just him saying what he thinks about a particular issue, and I love that one. Now, closely related to that is this kind of expert analysis idea, where you're actually talking through the issues of an industry or a subject, and maybe passing that back. So it's about looking at the whole field rather than just passing on an opinion. A friend of our podcast, Thomas Bechdel, is one of the best expert analysis, I think, newsletters in terms of the media industry for us. Interviews is pretty straightforward. You do a newsletter, but you have an interview in there. There's a really good one in media from a guy called Jacob Cohn-Donnelly, who's known as a media operator. And he goes back and forth between thought leadership and the interview side of things. Interviews are great because as long as you can set up an interview, you've got guaranteed content. As long as you can get to a person that's interesting, interviews are a great way to go. And then the last one, and the one that we use, is this curation. The idea that you bring together the important news or the important stories from a particular field or subject. I think it's really important to know the difference between curation and aggregation. There used to be a lot of newsletters that just aggregated industry news. There still are. Some of them are quite good. But that's not what we're doing. What we're doing is actually making editorial decisions based on what we think is important. And I think that has its own inherent value. That's really where we're coming from on our newsletter. I don't think any of these are easier or harder to do than the others. I think it all depends on what resources you have in your organisation.
Yeah, and I think if you already produce a lot of content, you might be able to do analysis and interviews easier than people if you've got if you don't publish content and you're just looking to do this as a first time thing. But again, there's still value in curation, and I think it just goes back to that question at the start of what problem are you trying to solve for your audience and how can you add value?
I think each of these positions you as a voice in a particular space. So each of them is as valuable in terms of helping you promote your brand, but it's just a different way to get there. Okay, types of content within the newsletter. So a self-contained newsletter, there's more and more of these than there ever was before. And that Scott Galloway newsletter that I talked about actually doesn't really link out to anything else. It's just there, you read it and you move on. So it's almost like someone sending you a little letter. It's stuck there in your inbox. You don't have to go anywhere else. I think there's more of those than there used to be. Maybe the most common type of newsletter is that idea of linking from the newsletter to content on your own website. It's a great way of driving traffic, and I think a lot of people are using it. The issue with that one is you're limited to how much content you produce on your own website, and linking out to other websites is a way of getting past that. So you can sort of choose the best content, probably not competitive content, but choose the best content in a particular field. I actually think that all of the above is the best way of going with this. If you've got your own content that's readable inside that newsletter, our first story actually in the newsletter every day is longer than the other ones. And you can link out to it, but not that many people link out from our first story because they read our analysis of the story in the newsletter. But the other stories that we have linked to other people's website and they get clicked out on much more. So you can have a little bit of both going on. I guess it just depends again what resources you have. Do you have the resource to write that stuff yourself? Do you have the resource to research other content? Or do you have a decent amount of content on your own website? But there's no reason why you can't mix and match.
Yeah. I mean, it's quite a common format is to have your own content and then 5 things we read this week that we found interesting. A lot of people increasingly are doing that. Shows you're on top of things.
This is a huge one. Huge in sense of the conversation that was had around it. We do a daily newsletter, and Esther talked a little bit about why we do that. But weekly, fortnightly, monthly. My personal opinion is if you go monthly, you're not frequent enough and people will forget you. You get lost in the mix. Fortnightly, don't know. Weekly, I think, is not a bad one. Daily is the best one for growing traffic and growing your audience, but it's hard work. I think the only reason, Esther, correct me if I'm wrong, the only reason we can do a daily newsletter the way we do it is because there's 3 of us. And we basically take turns, we rotate it between the 3 of us. It's a hell of a commitment, to be honest.
Yeah, I think as well, it's because we happen to be, our curation model means that we're picking out the stories from that day. And there is a lot of media news. I think if you're working in an industry where there is less news, you might struggle a bit with daily. But there's still a lot of value you can provide in a weekly roundup or weekly analysis and that sort of thing.
One of the things that we can talk about till the cows come home is establishing a proper solid workflow for doing that daily newsletter. You have to know where your content is. You have to know how you're going to get it into your newsletter templates. And you have to know who's doing what. I guess we kind of learned, we didn't learn it the hard way in the sense that we didn't break anything, we didn't make any mistakes, but it was the first few issues, I guess, we were trying to figure it out, and it took significantly longer than it does now. So figuring out the workflow is a really big deal.
I think this is especially important. I mean, for us three, we're just three freelancers basically that come together and do it. But if you're looking at doing this within an organization, one of the things that will kill an editorial email is if you're sitting there and just saying, okay, yeah, you've done the draft, that needs to go to 3 people for approval, and then it'll get sent out next week. That can't be the workflow. You need to have people that are empowered to be in charge of those decisions. I mean, test by all means, definitely test. But that workflow needs to be very, very snappy. And even if you're doing a weekly email, especially if there's any kind of news or content or analysis that is timely, you need to have the approvals workflow sorted with that as well.
WhatsApp is our friend. We do a lot of stuff on WhatsApp.
Yeah. I just say from having worked in a publishing business, yes, this email's great, but it needs to go to so-and-so for approval, and they're off for 2 weeks is the absolute death of emails.
Okay, so how are you going to grow your newsletter, assuming that you believe, like me, that media is a numbers game? How are you going to grow it? And I think this is just the same as your standard marketing approach, marketing channels that you already have in place. One of the things that we did, we took the weekly list and asked people to opt in for the daily. We didn't just port it across. We didn't think that was right, asking people to go from a weekly to a daily. So we basically had this little campaign to get people to move across. And what is about half of the people moved across, give or take?
I think that was it by the end of it. But the other half weren't particularly engaged data, and I'll talk about this in a bit. But yeah, I can imagine a lot of you watching you'll have your own data, and it's important not to just say we're just going to send them all a newsletter. Like, you need to be able to justify to them how you're going to give them something valuable, and then let them come to you and let them get it, because 100 engaged newsletter openers are far better than the 10,000 you might have in your data pot.
Yep, absolutely. And the other stuff is pretty standard: social media, web, print ads in other people's print or on other people's webs, and newsletter swaps. Just get your message out there to your audience. You want to tell people, but again, comes back to that messaging, that short, sharp message of what you actually do with your newsletter. How you can do that is there's all sorts of in social media particularly, we use quotes out of the podcast, we use quotes out of the actual newsletter. The newsletter system that we've got tweets every issue, puts it out there automatically. So there's all sorts of stuff. We have pop-ups on the website so that when you come to the website, there's a pop-up immediately there. Any of the reports or whatever we do, we add in a house ad about the newsletter, about a podcast, whatever. It's standard stuff, but you've got to remember to do it. And the newsletter, I think, sometimes gets kind of forgotten about. So get it on the list in that sense.
Yeah. I'll just quickly say, if anybody, we've got a couple of questions come in. If anybody does want to ask a question, we've just got a few more slides and then we'll go into questions. So next couple of questions would be good.
Okay, big one. How do you measure success? I mean, how you measure success depends a little bit on what you consider to be success. Is it about making money? Is it about growing your audience? Is it about loyalty and engagement? I think by subscribers, I don't necessarily mean paying people. I mean just registered people. So subscriber numbers, your absolute numbers are important, but it's also important to look at the trend. Is it going up? Have you got more people signing up than you have unsubscribing? One of the most heartbreaking things in the world is when someone unsubscribes for your newsletter. It's absolutely awful. You want to call them up and say, why did you unsubscribe? You take it really personally. So if you've got more subscribers coming in than you've got going out, that is absolutely a sign of success. A big thing that we talk about is the quality of the subscribers that we have. We don't have the scale of some people. We just can't have that scale with an outfit that's basically come from a side hustle. But what we do have is people at the biggest publishing companies in the country and actually in the world. So we've got people from Condé Nast, and we've got people from Hearst, and we've got, go on Esther, give me some names. I don't mean people names. God forbid we crash GDPR.
Yeah, no, we've got like Washington Post, Google. We've got some from Facebook actually, but we've got a small but mighty audience, and that for us is quite important.
And that's a really big deal.
Yeah, I'd say from having worked at a publisher, one of the things that, especially when you're looking at, this is more marketing emails, but you don't want to apply these same lessons to editorial emails, that people say, oh, we need scale, so let's bind some data. And it's like, you've not got a relationship with those people.
Yeah.
It's better to build a relationship with a small group solidly and regularly and consistently with good content than it is just to buy in, 10,000 email addresses and hope that gets you results. Because when it comes to editorial newsletters, even if that's then to support marketing aims like events and ticket sales later down the line, your editorial needs to be all about the quality and all about the content.
There's Seth Godin, the marketing guy, talks about being famous to the family. And I think that's really, really important, that concept, when you're talking about newsletters. The other measure, the other measure is engagement. So you might have 1,000 people on your newsletter list, but if only 25 of them actually open it, that's no good. So what you want to look at is opens, click-throughs, and actually the frequency that people are engaging. Are they open every issue? Do they open 1 in 3? Do they open 1 in 10? Those things are really important, because I think you can start to judge whether they like your content or not, whether they like the newsletter. If you can see your engagement, in terms of the number of opens going down, or the number of click-throughs going down, or how often people open, you've got an issue. So that is really, if you can keep those numbers up, that really is a good success measure. Yeah. And then the actions. Sorry, Esther, go.
In terms of content, that's actually helped shape our own. So just as an example, I'm absolutely obsessed with Facebook and Facebook's impact on the world, and it took a couple of weeks of our daily newsletter to learn that actually our audience weren't as interested in that as I was. We constantly kind of keep an eye on, what are they interested in, and a lot of the time it's really practical tips. So for us, that's now been every day we're going to try and include something that is actually it helps them make a practical difference within their business, and that's something that we learned from keeping an eye on those analytics and saying, what are people engaging with, and what do they want more of?
Yeah. In terms of other actions, we just basically mean, are they buying stuff? Are they doing stuff? Are they signing up for other stuff? Are they going to other articles in other places? Are they actually, is that newsletter a launch pad for some of the other stuff that you're doing, which again is really important.
So I actually just wanted to share, this is, so we use an email newsletter provider called Review, and they recently released a new analytics dashboard. So we were very focused on subscriber numbers, and you've got to get your numbers up, and then they released this, and actually this has completely refocused our own top metrics and what we use, and what we want to focus on is obviously getting that high and medium engagement numbers up. So for us, this compares each month, how engaged your audience compared to the month before. And this is based on actions they take, like opening, clicking through on things, the number of times they open the newsletter. You'll have your own dashboards depending on what email provider you choose. But for us, this has just helped take the focus a little bit off, we've got X number of subscribers. And it's actually, is this proving that what we're doing is valuable? And Review, actually, they also do a weekly newsletter about newsletters and newsletter tips and how to write a newsletter. And they apply this to themselves, and they actually get to the stage where when they've got that group of no engagement, they actually get in touch with them and they say, is there a reason you've not opened the email in a while? Is there anything that can make it more valuable to you? And they actually end up taking, if somebody's not opened an email for 6 months, they actually end up taking them off the list, because they say it's better to have a healthy, small, engaged list than it is just a massive list where you've got 200 people that aren't opening it.
Definitely. Okay, this slide is it's basically just trying to sum up what we think we've learned from doing 150 daily newsletters. And I think we've covered most of this in today's session. Be clear in your mission, what you're trying to do, what makes you different. Don't discount curation, possibly discount aggregation, but not curation, because you can actually add value. You can make some decisions that help people solve some problems using curation. Get your workflow right, because if you don't, it's a pain. Esther's just explained this fourth point perfectly. Be informed by the analytics, but not blinded by them. You know, that idea that you should be looking at trends, not individual numbers. That there's actually, you're on a trajectory. Try and understand the trajectory rather than the data point that's actually informing where you're at right at one particular time. But give yourself goals. Figure out what it is you're trying to do. Is it sign-ups? Is it click-throughs? Is it just getting people to open it more days than they used to? Is it just the size of your list? Is it getting them to buy stuff? It really depends why you want a newsletter. You know, we all want, we want these things basically ultimately so that we can make more money, but it's the path that it takes you on that gets you to that money. That's a big one, encouraging feedback in response to it. I think because other areas are so difficult with feedback. Social media is a nightmare for feedback. Comments on articles and on websites are a nightmare. Newsletter tends to be one-on-one and much easier to develop a conversation with your audience. So I think that's a really big one. And then this idea of, you know, see your newsletter as part of the portfolio that you're running and use it to make the business better, to focus people into other areas of your business and to sell more stuff or to get more sign-ups or to keep people engaged and loyal and build that relationship. Anything else, Esther?
I'll just say that final note on feedback. Again, this is just because the system we've got feedback is quite easy, but we and our audience is manageable. But if people take the time to respond to something you've written, I think it's really important to actually acknowledge that. And again, yeah, it's relationship building. If you send somebody a letter and they don't respond, it's a bit rude. I'm just going to pop this final slide up, and then Peter, I'm going to pass this question over to you because I was too young when blogs came around.
Oh, here we go. Eh?
So Paul Fenton says, what would you say are the main differences between sending a newsletter and writing a blog?
I mean, my business started as a blog, 2009 actually. So yeah, okay, you probably are significantly younger than that. I think it.
Oh, you've gone.
Am I here?
Yeah. Sorry, just cut out for a second.
I think it depends how you do the newsletter. There are newsletters. I'm thinking of Josh Sternberg's newsletter, actually, Media Nut, which is a blog. It's almost a daily blog. He just happens to write. He sends this 750,000 word post every day by email.
I mean, it's a difference in delivery, isn't it? Rather than having to.
Yeah, it's absolutely.
The blog comes to you.
It's that classic substrate idea. What is your substrate? Our newsletter is absolutely not a blog. You know, our newsletter has these 4 points, linking out to other people's stuff, and then our analysis of those stories. So I don't think that is a blog, but I think you can use a newsletter as a blog. Scott Galloway's the thought leadership blog that I talked, newsletter that I talked about, would work as a blog. So I don't know that there's that much of a difference, to be honest. But I guess the big difference is that idea of push and pull. That you're sending that email, that newsletter to someone, and the blog, you've got to get them to come to you. So in that sense, SEO and those kind of things are more important, whereas list building and relationships are more important with the newsletters.
We're going to squeeze in just one more from Gemma Swain, who says, is there an optimum length for a newsletter, excluding the fact that you might be linking to longer external articles?
Again, I think that depends why people are signing up for your newsletter. We give each other, the three of us give each other a really hard time when we go too long.
But that's because the value for us is in our our key value selling point is the brevity. Whereas somebody like Casey Newton will quite frequently write very, very long emails. And there's Gmail clipping limits, which is something to be aware of. But yeah, that one very much comes to value and what you're trying to add to your audience. And if it's brevity, then yes, there is such thing as too long a newsletter.
Yeah, and again, I think it depends why you're reading it. If I'm reading it like Casey, I don't read Casey Newton's newsletter necessarily every day because it is too long. I read it when he covers a subject that I'm really interested in. Whereas I would tend to read DigiDay's newsletter every day, although it's not always relevant. I'll at least get to the bottom of it and see what's going on in it. So it sort of depends. Are you trying to use the funnel to get people further into your products, or are you actually trying to deliver some information in the body of the newsletter? I would say that's part of the difference.
Well, I think that's it. Thank you very much, everybody. Our contact details are there if you've got any more questions or want to talk to us about anything else to do with newsletters or podcasts or anything else.
If you wanted to register for a newsletter, that'd be lovely.
Yes, you can do that on our website.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for your time today.